dignitaries from around the world arriving at that beach for this historic day. So let's keep the conversations going on this very important day. I want to invite in our guest who's joining me in studio, McKiel. He's a relative of one of the Canadian men who fought on D-Day. Dana, thanks so much for making time for us today. I know it's a busy one for you.
Not a problem, Natasha.
Let's talk about Private Hollis Leslie McKiel. Now, who was he and where was he on D-Day?
Private Hollis Leslie McKiel was a member of the North Nova Scotia Highlanders and was involved in D-Day operations, Operation Overlord. He was with the second wave of the assault on Juno Beach, and later was involved in a fierce battle at the Abbey Ardennes.
And how was he related to you?
And he's related, it appears that all McKiels are related in New Brunswick, as I've researched and I've found all these relatives, but more so after my parents passed away. And we found that Hollis Leslie McKiel was related to my dad, either as a brother or cousin. It's still not determined, and we've had to go through Ancestry Canada and the Royal Canadian Legion to determine just what that relationship was. But he's definitely related to all the McKiels in New Brunswick.
Okay. And I just want to let the audience know, Dana and I are sitting right across from each other, but because of the magic of TV, it looks like we're not in the same shot, but that's why we're both slightly at an angle, just so everyone knows why we're positioned this way. But I wanted to ask you, because it was heroic what he did, and it was a massive sacrifice. Talk to us about what happened to him once he arrived.
What happened was during the initial assault, the idea was to have the second wave leapfrog and move inward as quickly as possible. This unit, along with the New Brunswick Regiment, the North New Brunswick Regiment, the Regina Rifles and Winnipeg Rifles, they advanced further. And they moved in 5 miles deep, further than any other Allied unit on that day. And when they did, my relative, Hollis Leslie McKiel, was part of that infantry unit following tanks. There were 3 Canadian Sherman tanks that moved into position. They ran into the Waffen SS division. It was a Panzer division. This is Kurt Meyer, and he's a feared tank commander. And so they ran into that. They ran into 88s, Tiger tanks, machine guns, the whole 9 yards. 2 of the Canadian tanks were pounding away, and they got hit, eventually lit up on fire. The 3rd Canadian tank kept on pumping away and pounding at the opposition, and they were well dug in the Abbey Ardennes. And eventually it had to back off, and it exposed numerous Canadian soldiers, 20 of which were taken prisoners of war. And one of them was Hollis Leslie McKiel. He was hit with shrapnel. He still kept fighting over the course of the next day. Eventually taken prisoner of war, and the non-commissioned officers of Kurt Meyer's Panzer Division shot each one of them in the back of the head. It was execution, it was murder.
How do you know this? And forgive me, I'm sorry for the loss of your family member. I'm grateful as a Canadian for his sacrifice. I can see you're getting a bit emotional about it as well.
Yeah.
How did you find out about all of this when he didn't come back home?
Well chronicled. A lot of the information was well chronicled, especially that particular incident at the Abbey Ardennes. Kurt Meyer was later captured by Canadian forces, and he was brought to trial, world trial in The Hague, and he was sentenced to 20 years, which at the time was life imprisonment in Canada at Dorchester Penitentiary in New Brunswick. General Chris Vokes shortened that to 14 years, and eventually he was released back to British and German authorities, and later became a postal worker in Germany. And he eventually died in the early 60s. But we still have questions about that. My family and I, and all my brothers and I, we have questions about the decisions that were made by the Canadian Armed Forces and the Canadian government at the time. But nobody's alive. All those people that made those decisions, they're all dead now.
And you had multiple members of your family fight, not only on D-Day, but throughout the war.
Yep.
And you have, including your father.
My dad came thereafter with the Royal Canadian Artillery Regiment. He did 2 tours of Germany. And the second time he was Royal Canadian Engineers. He was a demolitions expert. I also had an uncle, Dr. George Dicker McKiel, goes by the same name as my dad. And he was with Bomber Command, bombed Dresden. They leveled the city. But his Lancaster bomber was shot down. He was taken prisoner at Luftstalag 3, and he's the man who came up with the idea of air compressors for those tunnels for which those prisoners were able to escape.
Wow, this is quite a family legacy. And I understand there's a street named after your family because of their vast contributions to this country. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, the history goes quite deep, 1703 here in Canada. And with that, the street, McKiel Street in St. John, New Brunswick, oldest incorporated city in Canada. The last uncle, also in World War II, was a member of the 2nd Canadian Division. He's from St. John. And carried on that legacy for quite a long time. And he was part of that unit that went up to Amsterdam, the Falaise, the Hockwell Gap, and they captured 40,000 German soldiers.
Wow. So Dana, let me ask you this. We're sitting here removed geographically, removed obviously by time from that experience, and yet we're also looking at these very ceremonious images in Omaha. And look at these amazing men who really put it all out on the line. There was no guarantee they were going to come back. So what is it like to watch this and knowing that your family cannot be there? Your Hollis is not there.
No, all of them have passed away. Looking at these military veterans and the few that are there, my connection with the Royal Canadian Legion, as my dad was a longtime member of Branch 10 here in Toronto, and the others who were branch members in Montreal and in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, certainly a lot of the stories you're finding now, you didn't find them back then. They were more interested in making sure that they ponied up to the bar and had a great time and they wanted to live life to its fullest. But they didn't tell us all those detailed stories until after they passed. And kids like myself would find all this information. My brothers and I found a treasure trove of information through my dad. His home looked like a bunker. After my mother passed away, he used tank shells as ashtrays. We found D-pin grenades in the drawers. We found over 600 rounds of 50 caliber machine gun cartridges in a barrack box. We had people knocking on the door wanting to take a tour of his home.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think, again, I mentioned that passage of time and how far away it feels, 80 years ago from D-Day specifically. Do we celebrate it enough? Do we remember enough, in your opinion?
I think we don't do enough. We'll never do enough. I think, organizations like Historica Canada and Ancestry Canada and the Royal Canadian Legion and all those different organizations across the country have got to educate more, especially with the fact we've added 4 million immigrants to the country, that they need to be educated about what happened and the fact that this country's free because of that.
Right. You know, I'm glad you brought up the issue of immigrants because so often for our veterans, it's seen through this lens of this is a very Anglo-Saxon or very French or white experience, and it isn't, you know? Like, we've had Indigenous members of the military from the beginning, but a huge Black contingency. You know, I come from South Asia. My great-grandfather fought in World War I on Flanders Field. So it's almost like Hollywood makes it seem a very specific way, but the actual picture of what these wars were and what D-Day was is different, you know, and we're all part of it in some way.
You know, it's absolutely, and I'm glad you said that because that's a key point. There were many Allied units, not just British, Canadian, American units. There were Indian units that moved up into Monte Cassino, and that was a hell of a battle back at that time.
Millions of them, millions and millions from the subcontinent.
And there were other Allied units that were not from Canada, Britain, or the United States that were in many famous battles. Yes. And there were Black and Indigenous personnel in the Canadian Armed Forces, and that's going back to World War I, and that's well chronicled, and we're very proud of that.
So when it is such a shared history, why aren't we connecting to it enough? Because you said it should be, but we're not realizing how vital it is?
I think a number of things. One, government. And we've got to make sure that our national government officials understand how important it is as part of an education. Two, our educational system, and making sure that it's part of a mandated process to have historical education on World War I, World War II, and Canadian military personnel, and everybody involved in these conflicts, in these battles. And three, to make sure that there's plenty of organizations out there that can get out there. And finally, media. Media coverage is huge, but it has to be consistent.
Let me ask you, when you're saying your family goes back to the Canadian military, 1700s, right?
Yep.
And these incredible sacrifices made. Did you join the military?
No, but that was an option. My parents never pressed it on my younger brother and I. We had great success in sports, and so we moved on in sports. My older brother took the opportunity. Interesting note, he just retired after 40 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, Chief Warrant Officer. And it's a really funny story. He used to skip high school and every Wednesday afternoon come down to Moss Park Armories in downtown Toronto and shoot with Toronto police in the ranges down below. He became such a good shot that in the late 70s, he went to the Bisley Shoot in London, England. It's a world championship for all military personnel in the world, and came second place.
Wow.
And another Canadian finished first, a member of the Canadian Navy. So he brought back the trophy, and it was about the size of, 5 feet, 6 feet tall, placed it in the middle of the living room, and my mother thought it was something you hang clothes on. So it's unbelievable.
So she wasn't so into it, but she was
she grew up in the military environment, no question about it, and she lived on the military base. I mean, when we were small in Normuckto, outside Camp Gagetown, we'd watch 80 to 100 Grizzly tanks going up the ditches. They can't travel on the highway because they cracked the highway. But the tank commanders would come out and they'd be outside the hatches and throw candy at all the kids on the lawn, including my brothers and I.
That must have been, it must have been like a movie for you guys, to be little kids and have these heroic, brave men, these soldiers, just part of the daily existence. Well,
it became, it was part of our lifestyle. Yeah. When you're a member of the Legion, my dad would invite back all the, to our home, all the Legion members, plus the Navy Cadet Band. And they would play Hail Britannia going up and down the street or up and down the parking lot near our home. And that's how it was. We lived military every day.
Let me ask you about your mom. I'm so glad you brought her up. The world has changed so much in 80 years, right?
Yep.
And the role of women in the military has changed so much. What was it like for your mom and for the senior females in your family to be in and around these military experiences? Did they talk to you about it?
Oh yeah, all the time. My mother knew how to de-pin grenades. She knew how to handle a C7 rifle. Wow. She knew how to go out in the backyard, although she didn't want my brothers and I to go out there with my dad and show us how to detonate mines or how to wire a building for demolition. And that's what we learned.
How did she learn?
She learned because of my dad.
Wow.
Yeah, my dad is you have to understand my father, and anybody watching from the Royal Canadian Legion or people who know him across the country, he's a cross between George Patton and John Wayne. You have to know this. He's known as the RSM.
So talk to us about Dad. What was Dad like? Did you adore and admire and want to be like him?
This guy is a great athlete, great hockey player in his day. As I said to one of your production people, Nathaniel Smith, that my dad was something else. I'm named after Willie O'Ree's half-brother. If you know Willie O'Ree, the first black NHL hockey player, his half-brother is very good friends of my dad back in the day. They all played hockey in Fredericton, New Brunswick after the war. And so I'm named after Dana Williams, and Dana Williams being half-brother of Willie O'Ree. So the sport angle was always there, hockey and baseball in particular, and some bowling. But I'll tell you, when you grew up in that household, it was long way up, short way down every day. It was balanced quarters on the beds. Everything has to be clean. Everything looks military style. Okay. No question about it. And that was for my older brother and my younger brother.
What do you think of that as we continue to watch this incredible scene unfold at Omaha Beach, where we've got our Prime Minister there, all these leaders, and yet, you know, our military spending, our position as peacekeepers around the world, it has waned. It's gone up and down. And if you could speak to these people who are making these critical decisions about our military and our reinforcements, what would you say to them?
First off, I would say the federal government, and specifically to Bill Blair. I know Bill from his days when he was a high school quarterback at Johnny MacDonald High School here in Toronto, and say to them that has to come up past 2%. Start looking at 3% of GDP in order for spending on Canadian military personnel. We need to start playing our weight again. We've seen that wane over the past 8 years. Mm-hmm. That's not going to happen again. Once the government is changed, then we'll have a new government in there, and there's going to be a new thought as to our Canadian military personnel and all our assets, planes, ships, tanks, the whole 9 yards. We need to fortify. Right now, the international situation is not good. You've got a war going on in Ukraine with Russia. We've got the war going on right now in the Middle East. And then we've got all that tension over there in the Taiwan Strait near China. And I'm watching all the military personnel and the decisions that are being made. You watch the movements. Don't listen to the media reports. Don't listen to the politicians. All you do is watch the movements of military assets. Then you know what decisions are being made. And I'm watching them quite closely, and I also compare notes with my older brother about it because he is particularly interested in what's going on with this. After being a CWO and retired from over 40 years, he has a pretty good idea what's going on.
All right. Well, it's good to keep in mind because we're talking about history, but the war is still ongoing. Dana, before I let you go, I did want to thank you because you brought in these booklets. Folks, I wish you could see, like, it's pages and pages of images and history and documentation of your family's incredible contribution to this country. Yeah. You're going to an event to mark D-Day after this interview.
Correct.
Leave us with a final thought about what this day means to you and your family.
Freedom. Freedom for everybody. If it wasn't for those people,
it's okay.
If it wasn't for those people, we wouldn't be here today.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Hollis. Thank you to your dad. Thanks to your mom and your brother.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That is Dana McKiel joining us in studio. Woo, it's getting emotional in here, folks.